Good morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where our first movie news story actually has to do with a TV show, but one that's as popular as a movie, and dominated Twitter yesterday and fan discussion in general when HBO revealed with their first poster for the new season of Game of Thrones that Jon Snow would be returning. Now, I believe he'd already been spotted on set while they were filming, so rumors were already swirling, but now it is confirmed. Because, there's always the possibility that he was there for a flashback sequence or a dream sequence, etc., etc. Game of Thrones is a mythology show after all. Now, first off, you might be like, well, why are you covering a Game of Thrones story on Morning Movie News? Well, first of all, as I said, this dominated fan discussion yesterday, and also when the new season of Game of Thrones starts, since I'm moving a little bit into television, I will be recapping that show in addition to the, Jessica Jones, the Marvel Netflix shows, DC Legends of Tomorrow, which we're also going to talk about today. And so I think we should start introducing that into the conversation now. But anyway, I also think I really have something that I want to say about the way the story developed over the course of the day. And The Walking Dead got in on this because they, of course, have been taking a lot of heat for killing Glenn. I don't watch Walking Dead, so that's not a show I'll be recapping, but I'm certainly aware of what's going on with that show. How can you not? Its fandom is so intense and so big. So I've heard a lot about people complaining about the murder of Glenn, the death of Glenn, by death by zombie, a real hazard on that show. And I thought it was interesting that they had the gall over at AMC and the Walking Dead team to call Game of Thrones out on what I think is clearly a development within Game of Thrones that is perfectly within the rules of the show. And they did not lie to viewers. I saw a lot of people saying yesterday on Twitter, oh, HBO lied, the Game of Thrones people lied just to throw us off, Jon Snow isn't dead. Because they said several times, everybody from Kit Harington on, Jon Snow is dead. And I think they were 100% telling the truth. I think he's clearly going to be a White Walker. And I think it's fascinating for two reasons. One, I think that this is the most, I'm not sure which is the most obvious. I think one is more obvious to readers, and I haven't read the Game of Thrones novels, but I've done a lot of research because I just like the show, and so I'm always looking into what's going on with that, so I know kind of what happens in the books a little bit, but I think that there's something that's more obvious also to people who only watch the show. So I guess we'll start with that. And you might remember during the last season, the White Walker King was eyeballing Jon Snow hard. He was like, who is this man, this human, this alive person who's able to lead forces against me successfully? And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of like the way the direction of the show goes. Also, it gets Jon Snow finally out of the Night's Watch, right? They've been trying so hard to get him out of there, but how do you make a wonderful person give up his oath, right? I mean, they came up with a couple of excuses, but it was never long term. But they got one now. So I think he's going to get drafted into the White Walker army by he'll be the White Walker King's, favorite champion. And I think that the Night's Watch is going to feel plenty stupid that they created their own worst enemy, right? They're like, damn it, he was supposed to be our special weapon. Now he's a special weapon against us. Although after they killed Jon Snow, who feels bad for anyone on the Night's Watch? Even that little kid. Although I think they did a good job of making it clear why they did what they did. So anyway, the other thing that I think is very interesting and surprising and obvious to people who read the books is that they're taking the Catelyn Stark storyline, the Lady Stoneheart storyline, and kind of giving it to Jon Snow. I guess that actress didn't want to return maybe, or she's not as popular as Jon Snow, but a lot of people were disappointed after the Red Wedding that Catelyn Stark didn't become Lady Stoneheart, which is basically, a Walking Dead vengeful, individual, right? And so she had this really cool, like Halloween-esque horrific look, and I think, people expected that to occur, and it did not. But it's interesting to see that the makers of the show have decided to not give up that idea and just have applied it to a more popular character who they obviously want to keep around. There's more of an incentive to keep around. So I think it's interesting, and I'll be curious to see if they do take the Lady Stoneheart, approach, if that is indeed what it seems to be. And I'm curious, for those of you who are fans of just the show, do you feel lied to that Jon Snow is coming back, even if he's still dead, or you think it's an awesome twist? And do you think he'll work for the White Walker King? And then also for fans of the books, what do you think of taking Catelyn Stark's really awesome storyline and giving it to Jon Snow? And I think to some degree you have to mention that's taking something from a female character and giving it to a male character. However, Game of Thrones has wonderful female characters. There really isn't anything you can complain about with the show in that regard, but So I guess that also is one of the reasons this is surprising, that they would take that element, because they're so great with their female characters, and Caitlin Stark was such a wonderful character and so well realized by that actress that it's weird to see the show do something like that. But I'm excited, and Kit Harington, well, I'm glad for Kit Harington, because clearly nobody wants to see him on the big screen as he's in flop after flop movie-wise. So I'm glad this gig hasn't dried up for him. All right, so the second story is the DC Legends of Tomorrow. This is a little bit of a more legitimate movie news story. I just wanted to touch on this. I'm not going to review the trailer because I'm just not quite sure. I guess maybe there's so much. I am a little backlogged on trailers. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to cover TV. But anyway, DC Legends of Tomorrow, I think the trailer was amazing. I think the trailer was very good. I loved the highlighting the time travel element of the show. I mean, forget villain of the week. I think time period of the week is pretty awesome. That's a very good way to go, and it makes me even more excited for that show. However, the reason this got a lot of attention yesterday, I saw a lot of people talking about it, not only because it was awesome, but because they made a Batman and Superman reference within the trailer. And everybody was just saying, oh, Batman, Superman reference in the trailer. And I was like, really? These are separate universes. What's going on here? The television and the movies for DC and Warner Brothers are separate. So I watched the trailer right away because I was like, oh, is this movie news? Like legitimate movie news? So I went to look, and it was just really the smallest of mentions. Like he's seen, Rip Hunter said, I've seen Men of Steel and Dark Knights, fall to this, to Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage looks very cool, very well realized. Vandal Savage is a hard character to realize well, so I'm glad it looks like they're doing a good job. But that was such a small reference, and I think this is sometimes where, I don't know. I mean, I think this is sometimes where fandom gets runs off the rails and sometimes loses the casual fans. And casual fans are important. Diehard fans are very important because they drive your discussion. But you want to make sure that you keep your I've seen a lot of people, I guess, basically talking about fan burnout recently, just saying I can't take it anymore, especially with Star Wars. People are talking about that in particular, but just saying there's just so much minutia and so many Easter eggs, and some of them are so so obscure and just so minor that it's just it's becoming really difficult to keep up with the fandom. And so I would say that DC Legends of Tomorrow, besides, otherwise, amazing trailer again. But I think the Bats and Soups reference was, I think it was a little bit not very nice to fans. I think it was put in there because their universes aren't connected, right? And you're not going to, Superman's showing up in the Supergirl show, which I think is a mistake, but you're not going to have Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck showing up in DC Legends of Tomorrow. So it's why do that? Why do that to the fandom? And why tease this? Why tease us like that? I just feel it was a little bit underhanded. It was a little bit of a low blow. So I'm curious, what do you think? Will you take any Bats and Soups reference you can get? Or do you think that DC Legends of Tomorrow and all these different shows, maybe young Master Bruce Wayne, maybe they can go back in time and visit, Gotham over on Fox, although I would be surprised to see that happen. But anyway, maybe they can do it that way. But how many Bruce Waynes are we going to have running around if they do it another way? So I'm just curious, what do you think of that kind of reference? And how do you feel about Easter eggs? Do you think that you will take as many as you can get, or do you think sometimes they wreak a little bit of desperation and manipulation from the creators of the show? All right, so the third story of the day is a genuine movie news story, and this is about that Neill Blomkamp Alien film, which Michael Biehn actually is going around talking up because he was supposed to be in it, and now it's been put on hold. And I think he said, actually, I'm pretty upset about it. Well, not upset, but disappointed. And I thought it was interesting because this is the second older talent from yesteryear we've had seen going to today's press and social media trying to maybe push the fandom to help them out, right? So the first was Val Kilmer that we talked about last week, really being Top Gun 2, oh my god, I'm so excited, OMG. And then his management team was like, what are you doing, Val? You're bring your price down. And he was like, oops. But he was just very excited. But I think Michael Biehn is a little more calculated. He, of course, was in the original Terminator, and then he was, because, James Cameron then directed Alien, so he put Michael Biehn in that as well. So Michael Biehn really only worked because of James Cameron. So anyway, he's still a part of the Alien franchise, and so Neill Blomkamp, one of the reasons that Neill Blomkamp even got his thing greenlit was that he had all this concept art with Sigourney Weaver and Michael Biehn in it. And so everyone was like, oh my god, it's the Aliens, people, I'm so excited. And so Neill Blomkamp got his deal, but then it got put on hold. So what did Michael Biehn do? Well, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, but Michael Biehn, all right, Mike, he went to the press and he was like, I don't think they're gonna like not do Neill Blomkamp's Alien because Sigourney Weaver said we were going to do it, and Fox said we were going to do it, and I don't think they want to embarrass themselves like that. He actually said embarrass themselves. I was like, that's some strong subliminal messages or outright messages there, Mike. And then he said, my kids were really excited for me to return to the franchise, so they were all going online, and it was on Reddit. They were all excited about it, and I was like, this is a strong push, Mike. But then he gave an interesting detail about what Neill Blomkamp had planned, which actually sounds really good. So what he said was they were going to get rid of Aliens 3 and 4, good idea, and just come off of Alien 2, the first two Alien movies. I think still the best. Prometheus, it's really only, I think, good because of the production design and Michael Fassbender's performance, right? That's why they're going to have tons of Michael Fassbenders, apparently, in Alien Covenant, which is what they're now calling Alien Paradise Lost. It's a mess. But anyway, Neill Blomkamp wanted to go back to basics, and he wanted to have a movie take place years later after Alien 2, where basically Newt is grown up, and so you have a role for a young actress, a Hollywood ingenue to come in there. Although look how that turned out with Terminator Genesis, right? It doesn't always turn out so hot, everybody. But basically, Sigourney Weaver's Ripley would hand the mantle of the Alien franchise over to Newt. It's kind of like what is happening right now with the Rocky franchise, where Rocky Balboa is handing the mantle over to Creed's son, Adonis Creed, right? And so I think, if they get the right casting for Newt, it could potentially work. I have a hard time imagining the Alien franchise without Ripley. I think, she's as important as the Alien, quite frankly. But at the same time, I didn't think I could see Rocky without Rocky, but Creed totally sold me on that. It totally was fantastic. I love that movie. Seeing it again this weekend, already have my tickets. But anyway, so I'm open to the idea of this working as long as they do a really good job casting Newt. Maybe Brie Larson could get this gig because, of course, Brie Larson was supposed to be Sarah Connor, lost the role out to Daenerys, lucked out, and now, of course, is going to probably be Oscar nominated and maybe even Oscar win for Room. So I think it will be a wonderful thing for her to get Alien. It would be wonderful for Alien to get her. So something like that would be very nice. So I'm curious, what do you think? Are you starting to get more excited about Neill Blomkamp's Alien again? And are you like, I wish Alien Covenant wasn't in the way? Or are you like, I can't wait for Alien Covenant, more Michael Fassbender, maybe Rebecca Ferguson from Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, her name's floating around with that movie. And then we'll just wait on seeing Newt come back. And also, would you be into an Alien franchise that was handed over to Newt and, Ripley took a back seat, or maybe even just left totally? I think she could maybe just stay in a back seat. Sigourney Weaver ain't above a paycheck gig, as we've seen many times. And this would be a paycheck gig / legit gig. All right, so the viewer question is absolutely fabulous. I saw this and I was like, it was immediate lightning. I was like, this is fantastic. So this is from Creewark Productions. So Creewark says, "Hey Grace, longtime viewer, I love your work and look forward to your videos every day." Aw, thank you for saying that. I've never asked a question before, but in this case, I can't find the answer, so hopefully you could help. My pleasure. With Fox owning the film rights to Fantastic Four and the X-Men, and the recent news that they pulled the sequel to Fantastic Four from their release schedule, that's true, Fantastic Four has been pulled from Fox's release schedule. It was set for 2017. But Creewark Productions says, something hit me. If they decided to try for a fourth time, although it's a wild idea, would they be allowed to produce an animated film to avoid having the rights revert back to Marvel, considering they only have a certain time frame to keep the characters on the bench before they revert back to Marvel? Thanks so much, and keep doing what you're doing. I think that this is it's tough for me to legitimately give you a definitive answer on this because none of us know the details of the Marvel Fox deal to that degree, like whether or not it has to be only live action. But it's such a good idea, Creewark Productions, that I had to bring it up so we could all geek out about it. Because I think that an animated Marvel movie, they talked about it a lot, being like, oh, Disney Animation's going to do one, and it ended up being Big Hero 6, which was a good movie, but I don't think it's I think we want Legend of Korra style animation when it comes to a Marvel property, right? Like, finally something that would be for an adult mainstream audience, but was animated. And that would be wonderful because, in Legend of Korra and the Avatar series, The Last Airbender, they were able to do all these amazing visual effects battle sequences in animation. Now, animation's not cheap, but it's not as expensive as, having to pay people for their time to do live action acting and all the visual effects work. That's how you get ridiculously high budgets. But you can do, I think you could do like a realistic I think you could do it for under $100 million if you were really frugal about it for an animated movie. And I think this would be a fantastic idea. And I think that you're really onto something, Crework Productions, and I hope that this somehow gets to the people at Fox, because this would be a really good idea. It would allow them to keep the franchises in-house and not have to revert back to Marvel. It would be extremely refreshing from the live-action mistakes they keep putting up, and I think they would allow them to go to town with maybe some really amazing visuals. And also, they would be able to crack the adult, genre animation nut here in America. Because, of course, I think obviously in Asia with stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Cowboy Bebop, they have no problem with that. But if you could do something like that would appeal to American audiences, I think that would be very exciting indeed. And so I'm curious, who here would see that? I mean, and I think, obviously a lot of us would, but, be honest, if you're not, a big animation fan, would you maybe be willing to go and see this? And do you, considering the people who maybe aren't as avid moviegoers as you, do you think they would be into this? Or do you think it would be another fantastic flop? But fantastic idea, Crework Productions. I love it. I think it's a brilliant idea. They don't need to do that with the X-Men, but Fantastic Four, that would be a great direction to go in. I think you might have solved Fox's problem. Hopefully they're as smart as you are. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer idea, and anything you'd like to cover tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.